everyone, welcome to BestSockets by BestDeveloper by BestMat. Today, I'll be explaining what is BestSockets, the sockets with JavaScript and Node.js, and I'll be explaining how we exactly made this wonderful application. Now, to get started, what exactly are sockets? In JavaScript, sockets are a way to enable real-time bi-directional communication between a client, usually a web browser like Chrome, Microsoft Edge, and a server. Now, the server is usually made in Node.js, with respect to JavaScript. They provide a persistent connection, so the connection never gets interrupted, unlike the traditional HTTP request response model. So, what exactly does this mean? Let me show you. Okay, now first of all, we'll be having a client, which is usually a web browser. We'll take the example of Chrome here. So in Chrome, we have something called the V8 JavaScript engine. Now with this, if I want to send maybe some data or something like that, how can I send it? The usual approach is we'll be having a Node.js server. That's it. And this server is usually made in things like express.js. And we just connect these two like this. Voila, that's how it works. But what about making it bi-directional? Like you can only send things from the server to the client. You can't do the opposite. For this, we have something called a HTTP post request where you actually do the same thing, but the problem is that it's not that real time. Now, by real time, what do I mean? Now, for example, if you take the example of WhatsApp or some messaging application, if I send a message from one client to the other client, it should be real time. The problem with this is that each and every time you use the fetch API. Now we will be using the fetch API here, which is an inbuilt JavaScript API in Node.js and V8. By using this, you can use it only once to fetch one information. So you'll be doing something like while true, you have to fetch it again and again, which basically is an infinite loop and crashes the server. So it's basically impossible to make it completely bidirectional, and also it is impossible to make it like a real time server. So this is the problem with our classic HTTP server. So now we are introducing something called sockets. Now, if you have a best socket server over here, instead, you don't need a fetch API, number one. Number two, this is bidirectional, so it can go like this, or it can go something, or it can go the opposite direction too. So basically, it can go from the client to the server, or it can go from the server to the client, just like this. And the advantage of this over the HTTP thing mainly is because it is real time. It's a real-time server connection, so each and every data is transmitted in something called a socket. Now, what is a socket? I will explain this. So, for example, this is our socket connection. Now, what exactly does the socket do? I'll be explaining about this. So, socket is going from the best socket server to the client in the form of bytes. How does this happen? I will explain this. So you can see that the client over here is the V8 engine, and we're having the server in Node.js. We can see that the socket packet is transmitted from the Node.js server to the V8 engine in the form of bytes. Bytes. So we send this in byte data. Now, how is the socket packet divided into? It can be 7 bits, it can be 16 bits, or it can be 64 bits. Now, 7 bits is called the data usual packet. So, it is used for very small communication systems. It's not that used, but it was very common back in the day into the 2000s. 16 bit is the traditional thing that we will be using. 64 bits is like you can almost in unlimited of data here. Those called 64 bits is actually the 64 bits of a single packet, not the socket, the data It's not 64 bit. The packet is limited to 64 bits. So it's basically a huge amount of data that you can transmit. So with best socket, you can send with 64 bits of the packet. So V8 offers something called the WebSocket constructor. So you can see that WebSocket is already existing, and if you want to check it, just go over here to your developer console, and if you just type in WebSocket over here, you can see that it exists. Now you can make a new WebSocket. Sorry, a new WebSocket. You can see that we are getting a class. That's why I was telling this error. If I put something like this, we can see that we need one argument. So this argument is the connection. We can see the URL. Now, for example, if I put http colon localhost 1337, this basically sends a request in the form of sockets to our server. So this is what exactly happens. Now this socket is of mainly how many types? It's mainly of three types, and these three types are 7 bits, 16 bits, and 64 bits, as I told. So 7 bits, 16 bits, and 64 bits, and here we'll be using the 64 bits. Okay, now let's get started with the BestSocket code explanation. So for the code, you can find it on GitHub, and this is a complicated task actually that doing, especially in JavaScript, but I will try to give the best simple explanation. So this is the first snippet of code, the copyright trademark. Then we have import create server from HTTP. So using the traditional Node.js HTTP and crypto module. So we creating HTTP server with the code as 200. We are writing the head, and we are ending it with a text called hello world to the client when it listens on the port 1337. They're using any libraries such as like Express.js or BestLab HTTP module. Now the next is a constant WebSocket magic key. What exactly is a magic key? Is it an API key? No, it's not. Because of course I will not showing an API key in a YouTube video, but then what does a magic key mean? Now if you want to connect um, a socket server directly to a socket client, we need something like a key which all is universal. So in the web, while making the www, we created something called a magic key, which transmits sockets. So where can you find this magic key? You can just search this key up. You'll be getting one from. You can see that this is a WebSocket ID. You can go to the MDN web docs. So you can see that to write WebSocket servers, you need this request here, and you also need this header, handshake header, which is this key over here. You can see this string. Now coming back, this is the magic key, and we'll be turning on the server by upgrading it with an on-socket upgrade function. So what is an on-socket upgrade function? It upgrades the basic server headers. With Node.js, by using HTTP module, we are we are successfully getting the socket. Okay, now talking about the on-socket upgrade function, it takes three parameters: request, socket, and head. So we're making a new variable called the secured WebSocket key, which is the web client socket key, which is the rec.header, so we'll be sending to the socket. So we just make a connect message, and we'll be making the headers with something called prepare handshake headers. What's the handshake? I'll just tell it in a while. With the WebSocket client key that we already have, then we'll be socket dot writing it, and then we'll be socket dot on making it a readable function. Now what is on socket readable is another function which I'll be talking about. So if we just console.log the rec dot headers, will be seeing this JSON. You can see that we're getting a WebSocket key over here. This is the key that we especially need. This is the key which is connected to the V8 engine. What do I mean by that? Okay, so when our JavaScript, our vanilla JavaScript, our V8 JavaScript sends some request um sorry, when it sends a request to a client. Okay, it's not this direction, it's the other direction. Yes, when this happens, then what do we need? How do we know that this is separate from this client? So this is instead of V8, this is a client 2, which is also in V8. So there are two connections, so how do we know which one is what? So this will be having a key, this will also be having a key. Thing is that the keys are different, so we can easily um, separate them. We can see that this is a key of one of the client that we had, and this is another key. I will show all of this in practical in just a few more minutes. Okay, so I'll be talking about the bit integer markings. What is this? Let me just explain. So this is the most complex part of our entire application. Why? It's based on the byte chart. What is a byte chart? So a byte chart is when it's a chart which is used to combine JavaScript bitwise strings directly into C or C++ bytes. Why C or C++? Because JavaScript, I'm talking about the V8 or Node.js engine, which is made on top of C and C++. These are the values. There are no specific reasons for why the integers are like this. But the 7 bits integer mark is 125, 16 is 126, 64 is 127, and we're going to use 127 in this case. Our first bit is going to be 128. Our mask key is going to be 4, and our opcode text is going to be 0x01. What is 0x01? It's nothing but 1. I'll just show it over here. If I go to node, if I type 0x01, you can see it's 1. The maximum 16-bit integer is 2 caret 16. So you can see that this is the bitwise table for the opcode text of the socket. Now the socket, the on socket readable function that we're talking about is over here. So this is also complicated. Now what we exactly doing here? We are consuming the opcode of the first byte. Remember, one byte is 8 bits. The first bit of the byte is always 1 for client to server messages. To say that this is a perfect connection, we use 1. Now we subtract 1 bit from this byte. Why? Because we don't need that 1, because it's just a client connection success code. So if you subtract that 1 bit, which is 128 or this binary number, to get rid of the mask bit. This is what we call as a mask bit, to say that our client and the server are ready. The next thing we're talking about is the unsigned big endian 6-bit integer, which is to the power of 16. So you can check the C and C++ code for the UINT reference, which I'll give a link in the description. So the WebSocket usually consists of either mainly 16 bits or 64 bits. For more than 64 bits, it's going to be complicated. Why? Because still now it's very hard to transmit a 64 bit, because I can show you 64. The 64 is this number. I'm really doing that with another 64. Why 3 times? Because we have a WebSocket connection. Now talking about the 128, so this is 64-bit connection. I'm talking about the 2 into 64 plus 128. So what does this mean? We'll explain this shortly. Okay, it's telling undefined. Let's try. Okay, so you can see that the value increases and it's more than infinity. It's my first time checking this out. I mean, it's truly like a big thing. Now, why 64 three times? Because of WebSocket connection. You can see socket dot close is 3. You can see WebSocket dot close is 3. That's the reason we are seeing 3 times. And why 128? If you go back to the chart that I was showing, you can see the first bit is 128. Now, why this? We will be adding both of them, because when we say WebSocket dot prototype dot add is equal to function, which basically returns 2. If I say WebSocket dot add, Okay. Yeah, so we're getting undefined. Why undefined? This the reason is because we're not giving anything inside the brackets. If we bought 64 plus 128, we'll be getting the exact value as 2. Okay, now let's speed up. The next part is prepare handshake headers. So what is a handshake? So to make a connection between Node.js and the V8 web, we'll be making something called a handshake. Now the handshake consists of something called sending messages by concatenating it with backslash r and backslash n. We'll be putting the headers that we saw in the MD5 docs over there, and we're all doing this with JavaScript. Again, let me go back to my whiteboard. So let me delete this. Let's call this as our key. Now, this connection, if it is successful, then I'm telling that it's going to be a handshake. Let's just handshake. Let me try the AI. Okay, so this is the AI what it says, but actually it's not the handshake view. Is something like the client slash V8 will be shaking its hands with actually this diagram is completely wrong. Yeah, it will be shaking its hands, or we can say connect with server. So this is how header is successful. Let me go back to my main diagram and take this over here. Okay, so yeah, let's go back. So this is how the handshake works. Next thing is preparing message. So preparing message is basically about the buffering. Now, if you take an ABC and convert it to a buffer, you get 61, 63, and array of 1, 2, 3, you get 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. Array with nothing is nothing, and 0 is going to be 30. So we can find this code in GitHub later. This is the exception handling. It's just if we get an uncaught exception or handle rejections, we're going to say best developer error, uncaught JavaScript exception. So this is about our WebSocket server explanation. So as you can see that this is running perfectly over here. Now let me connect this wonderful thing to an HTML. Now you can see something called message ID 39 name BestMat. What is this? Let me show you my HTML JavaScript code over here. You can see over here that I am getting an output messages thing here. So the messages are retrieved over here. I'm making a new socket connection to 137. So when I open this connection, I'm using a built-in WebSocket V8 engine. So it's going to make a random number which is we call as an ID, and we're going to send this data. So when I send this data, it gets received over here, and you can see that we just received something cool. And you can see that this is the thing that I showed you before. You can see this the ID of the website, and you can see that the unmasking calculation has been done over here, and we have decoded everything. You can see that all these bytes are using the bitwise XOR operator. We have got all of this, so we just concatenate this and we get this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this back to the client. How? You can just look over here. We're going to send a message, the same message that we retrieved with a new date function to the socket. And you can see that we received it with a new date over here. So this is how this is how JavaScript sockets work with best sockets. So we can try taking the source code, making a class for this, and making this into a constructor. So I'll give all the links and the presentation in the description below. Thank you so much for watching my video. um yeah.